My name is Marcus Griep. I did some presentations earlier on F# and monads and burritos, but today I wanted to talk a little bit about Elm and see if there was anybody here who attended any of the Elm workshop or anything like that earlier on in the presentation. You did? Okay. Do you guys have any familiarity with what Elm is, or kind of, what's your level of familiarity basically? Just getting started with it? Done anything with it? Not much of anything?
Just started project.
Okay. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll talk a little bit once we get stand VGA. Okay, there's a person holding a pumpkin. One of the things that I've got, you could either go to the Elm workshop stuff that was done by the presenter earlier in the presentation. I also have an Elm workshop thing that I did internally with my own company. We can't go through all of it in 30 minutes, but I can kind of give you some of the highlights and give you an idea of how Elm is put together. One of the things that I did in my particular workshop, which you can find on GitHub, Impress MSWLSC Elm workshop. It starts you off with a setup that will run Webpack instead of having things through Elm Reactor, and also has gives you a website that starts off by having your HTML already has links in for the Bootstrap styles. So one of the things that often, if you're creating Elm, you're generally compiling it to a JavaScript file. If you're an Elm Reactor, it's creating a static HTML page, and it can be a little bit difficult to style that or play around with the styles in there. With Webpack, I'm able to basically automatically have it go ahead and import in the particular JavaScript file that I want, and then provide these styles externally instead. So if you're wondering how you get styles into an Elm application, that's kind of how. Let's see. So let's go ahead and pull up. I happen to use Visual Studio Code for doing my Elm stuff. Let's see. Make sure I'm all up to date. And we'll there we go. Larger elements here. So I'll walk you through a little bit. This is kind of the end of workshop state of the Elm application that I was using. I did some things that were good in here. I did some things that were mainly for demonstration. Most of my stuff and that I do in my main view in Elm is all at the same level. Oftentimes what you'll want to do is you'll want to create components and then have those be subcomponents that you'll actually use. But the main concept of Elm is it's based around having a model, a way to update that model, and then a way to display that model through a view. Right? Those are the kind of the three main things. And in this case, I've got my model here that happens to have a name in progress, the number of clicks on a particular button. I've got I created a component called validation box, and then I was doing this health check example, and authentication, and kind of an example using auth0 and ports. So we'll get to that here in just a moment. So one of the first things that you do is you need to have kind of an initial model, and here's how I define my initial model for this particular one. And one of the things that's important to know about Elm is that it's a pure functional language, which means that you can't just inject side effects into the middle of your code. There is one side effect that you're allowed to inject, and that's debug.log, which is generally considered a safe thing. It just logs to the console. But other than that, you don't have access to side effects. Yeah?
So I know in the old like signal-based version of Elm, there were
Yep.
addresses which were not referentially transparent because they were like identity-based.
Exactly.
So the new version of Elm doesn't have that problem?
That's correct. Yeah, the new version of Elm is based around the concept of commands and subscriptions. So you'll notice here my initial model is actually my model paired with a command of some message type. And what that basically means is I can give some command to the Elm runtime that I want it to go and do some side effect and then return a value back to me, and it will be wrapped in message, because message is what my update function is actually going to accept. And so that's kind of, instead of saying, I want you to go do something and then you need to send a message back to my mailbox, you say, here's a command that I want you to go do, and it's going to have a type that comes back as a particular message. Right? And so in this case, I've got perform health check, which I've defined all the way down here at the bottom. And so perform health check, I've got a task that would go out to a particular location here, and then we go ahead and do a health check. And it will return back a task. And that task you can then say perform, and what you do is you say, if the task fails, then how do I transform it into the message? If the task succeeds, how do I transform it into a message? And it might be that in this particular case, I just decided that if there is a, task.perform, if we get an error, then we just always say that there was an error. I'm not reporting what type of error it was. I'm just stating that there was an error. But if there's a success, then I go ahead and take the health check result, roll it up, say that it was okay, and it comes back wrapped inside this health check message. Those things end up coming back into this update function, which is where we've got the signature here is that it's taking a message, and then it turns it into a model, or then it takes a model, and then it turns it into your next model, as well as some other commands that you might want to issue as well. And so this is also where you would be able to create some sort of side effects, or push some side effects out to the system based off of some update that came in. So let's see, do I have one here? Yeah, so like I have a command here that if you click a certain button, it's going to trigger redoing the health check. And that would be, again, sending off this command to perform the health check. Now there is another type of thing that comes in, which is subscriptions. And this is where you get access to events that just kind of come in from the outside world. They might be just random key presses. If you want to collect any key press that happens in the window, or if you wanted to collect mouse movements all of the time that are coming in through the window, then you can set up a subscription. And what a subscription is basically saying, so for example here, time, I've got a subscription on time, and I'm saying that every 5 seconds I want you to send a message back to my update function that has the message trigger health check. Right? And I could have it instead every 5 seconds. This time.every is actually, up at the very top there you can say it takes a time between how often it's going to send you a message, and then some function that converts the current time into a message. In my case, I'm not really caring about the time itself, so I just always just send the actual message that I want and discard the time. So that's kind of a subscription. Now you can change your subscriptions based off of your model. This might be the type of case where, for example, I wrote a little debug console for an internal application that I was writing, and I want to listen for key presses while the person is typing in the magic keys, and then they press enter, right? But once the console is open, I don't necessarily need to listen for keys anymore. And so then I can no longer need to subscribe to those key press events. And then when they close that console, then I could resubscribe to those key press events as well. And then here in main is where all of these things are tied together. So there's a concept of a program, And in this case, program never just means that it doesn't take any input, any initial input from when you start up the application. You can use program with flags if, for example, you wanted to take in the current location from JavaScript, the page's current location, and you wanted to feed that into your initial function. Then this week you could have it as program, and then it could have some particular type. It's like and then if you're program with flags, and now you can see that the init that it's expecting here, if I go and expand this up, but the init that it expects is going to take those flags and turn it into your initial model. Right, so that's a way that you can kind of start off with some initial state. Might be that you read something out of local storage or something like that as well. And then ports. So ports are interesting in that there's two ways to write ports. There's an outgoing port, and then there's an incoming port. Outgoing ports are generally ways you're going to issue commands, because they're going to be commands to the Elm runtime to go and interop with JavaScript. And then when incoming ports are done as subscriptions. And the way that they work is they take a function which is going to take whatever object is supposedly coming in from the JavaScript world, and how do I turn that into a message that I'm supposed to hand to your update? And you provide that, and then that gives you your actual subscription. So up here where I've got my subscriptions defined, I've got my auth0 result port, and I have a method that or a function here that's turning that into my authentication message so that my update function can handle that. The way that looks from the JavaScript side of things is here I've got my Elm main going ahead and doing full screen there. And then I've got my main ports, the auth0 show lock. I subscribe to that in JavaScript world, so like the command saying go and do this thing. Whenever that triggers, it's going to call this function with whatever the value that I sent out was. And in this case, it happens to be a particular options type. And then I pass that into my auth0 lock to show the sign-in. And then this happens to take a callback, which is going to let me know whether or not the authentication succeeded or failed. Now, one of the things about ports is that they're kind of like the customs and border protection for the Elm world. Right? It keeps the things that are happening in JavaScript that might not be exactly what they're supposed to be from coming into Elm and causing problems in your Elm world. And so in this case, I can't, there are only a couple different types of things that can pass through that wall, and discriminated unions are not one of them. You can have records that come through, you can have lists, arrays, integers, strings. You can also have maybes. Maybes is the one discriminated union that can come through that will just basically take a value and wrap it in just, or if it's a null, then it will just pass in nothing. So in this case, I wanted to pass in a result, and the way that I did that was I created this record here that has an error or an OK, and if it was an error, then I go ahead and I fill OK with the profile and the token that came from the callback. And if it was an error, then I go ahead and I pass along the error details. And then I pass this back into the Elm world by using send. And so this will trigger that subscription to send a message in through my update function, and then I can actually handle that authentication message. And so the way that I do that here is I get my authentication message back in here, and I can just update my authentication model and continue on. So, and then this right here is, so authentication has its own set of messages, and it might issue a command. In fact, it issues a command in order to show that lock screen that auth0 provides. There's this command.map, which basically allows, because the message is going to come back into your top level update function. And so this is how I specify how to route that command to the appropriate place when it comes back through. So those are the main components of kind of the Elm architecture for how messages move through the system and how you go from update to update and update. All of your side effects are generally done through commands, and if you need to interrupt with the JavaScript world, you generally are using ports in order to do that. One of the other things that can be nice within Elm is right here I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff with a view. If you're working on integrating something with Elm into an existing application, maybe you want it just to be there to handle making sure that you have a pure model that updates appropriately for various events that are coming through in your system. You can run Elm in a headless fashion, where it just doesn't produce a view, or your view is basically displaying nothing. And the way that you would do that is you would do your Elm main, and then you can say, worker. And that will just produce a headless version of it. And so you can still communicate with it through those ports in order to continue to send those signals that will update things. But that way your business logic continues to live, or your protected logic continues to live in the Elm world, where you know that you won't get undefined is not a function inside of there. Well, you can go ahead and then take that model back out and use it in your other places to actually render your view or do something else with it. The other thing that you can also do is you don't necessarily have to have it take over your full screen. You can also say embed and then provide it a target, some element here. And like you could say a particular div with a particular ID, and Elm will take over that particular div and display the view that's produced in that div instead of taking over the entire body. So, were there any particular questions that anybody had about Elm, or any other features that they weren't quite sure of, or how they would be able to get access to or use? This is kind of a very high-level overview of it, but yeah.
One thing I always wondered, like if you have, basically I want to combine lots of small Elm applications into a single page, because if I try to put all the states and modifications into my one Elm application, it can be difficult to handle. So I would wonder like how I can do that.
So part of that you can do by creating components and stuff like that. So delegate portions of your model to be handled by a subcomponent. Even if that subcomponent is headless and doesn't necessarily produce a view, like the authentication component right here does not produce a view. It doesn't have a view at all, but it keeps track of the state of authentication and that type of thing. And so the authentication is not actually in my top level model. I delegate those messages and the care of that model to a particular subcomponent.
So this delegation made by something like lenses, I suppose, yes?
So you could use lenses. There is some, there are some philosophical questions as to whether or not that's a good thing. I mean, there's a focused library that you can use that will allow you to compose lenses and be able to edit models that are deeper down in your hierarchy. But from an encapsulation perspective, it may not be necessarily what would be best. And the other thing is that with lenses is if you're doing modifications of multiple children, instead of having one update of the overall model, you update that high-level model multiple times, and that can cause some performance degradation that way.
But the model of our authentication model is a field of...
Yes.
Okay.
Now, one of the things that you can do is if you don't want somebody to be able to mess with your model in your subcomponent, what you can do is you can do this little trick where I can create a type model M, and I can call this, I'll just call this M. So now now this is a discriminated union with a single case. And I'll pull that M to here. And so now I've exported model, the type model, but I have not exported the type constructor or the data constructor M. So only this module is able to construct model, and only this module will actually be able to inspect inside of the model here. And then inside of my functions here, I have the overhead of needing to rewrap it with M or pattern match on M instead. It's like,
And messages, authentication messages is one of the case of application messages, right? It's like one of...
yeah, so within my main up here, my messages, one of them that I have is an authentication message.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Any other questions? Generally? Okay. Yeah, so if you haven't worked through either of the two Elm workshops, the one that was provided, I can't remember what his name was right now. Let's see. It's Fresh Eyeball is the username, and you have LambdaConf 2016 Elm workshop, and you can take a look through what he's got going on there, and he's got a little explanation of how they're going through here. So you can either do either of those. His has got a little bit better doing stuff with subcomponents, and then mine deals a little bit more with some of the being able to interact with JavaScript through ports a little bit towards the end. So, but yeah. Okay, thank you.